Hello and welcome to the Remaining Sane, Finding Peace in Our Chaos podcast, a podcast about both theology and police work. I'm your host, Will, and in today's episode, I interview a friend and longtime police officer, Ed Buckman. Morning, Ed.
Hello.
Ed, would you mind go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, where you're from, just a little bit of background?
My background, I've been a police officer for about 13 years now. I'm married and I've got 3 kids. Before I joined the police department, I was in the Marine Corps, and currently studying leadership in a doctoral program at Liberty University. I'm dedicated to my family. I love my kids, and my wife has been through some amazing times with me. And we've moved down here right before I joined the police department, and so we've lived down here kind of away from our family for, like I said, about 13 years now.
Yeah, and as with everyone that I've talked to who's been on this podcast so far, you are a believing Christian. That's very important to you. Would you mind, what's your I don't want to say just your theological background, but what tradition do you come from? Or
so kind of non-traditional. I had some sort of knowledge that there was a God growing up. The entire time growing up, I knew that there was a greater power. My family never went to church, but they would often say things that they were pushed out of a church. Being a little kid, I never had any kind of reference. I never saw it, but they're kind of like a negative sight and we came from a small town in Oregon, and so it was always kind of we got pushed out. We didn't have enough money. We were judged. And then I lived up in Ohio growing up, and I was kind of in and out of church, family, friends. Again, knew that there was God. I knew that there was a God. I did not know Jesus. And so moving down here, so we moved down here, and the difference being from Ohio versus down south is that, people ask, hey, where do you go to church? And I'm like, what? Just a lot of, we didn't have a church. We never had a home church or anything like that. And so I went through my second time through the police academy. I came to know a really good friend of mine, and he gave me a book by John Eldridge, Wild at Heart. That book, I'd come early in the morning and I started working through it. And in my truck, very cold January morning, I gave my life to Jesus, and that was 2013. And then from there,
praise God, first of all.
Praise God. Thank you, Jesus, for, working in my heart. And it really, and just to take a step back, it felt like, especially that retrospective, it felt like all the kindling was being placed in my life, that was the furrow rod that sparked the fire, was that book, that man that God moved into my life, because I had Christian brothers through the Marine Corps that one was a pastor, one was a believer, that they would do small groups, and I'd kind of a little bit in, a little bit out. So anyways, then started had my first son, and I was like, we need a church, and began praying with that. My relationship with Jesus began with long prayer time in my car before third shift work. Put the kid down, say goodbye to my wife, and I'd go sit out in my car just praying, reading through the Bible, like something I'd never done, and began praying for a church. And 2013 ish, Cop Church Chattanooga started, and so I was a cop. I needed a church, and loved Jonathan Parker as a brother and mentor, and God blessed us with Cop Church Chattanooga.
Well, I want to go back to one thing that you mentioned, is that you said that you believe that now in retrospect, you're looking back, and you said that you believe that the way that God worked for you in order to lead him to you, there's a lot of very small things that happen in your life that eventually lead up to this. I don't want to say just a conversion experience, or there's a whole lot of different terminology that we can bring, but I think that is something that I've noticed as a theme in Christian, or in, I don't want to say just satanic walks, but in walks away from Christ. That I can't remember what this quote's from, but the quote is, bankruptcy happens very slowly and all of a sudden. Very momentous things in our lives, for the most part, don't happen just all of a sudden. There's very small things that build up to those. And as police officers, as what I have posited earlier, that if we are not centered on Christ, we are going to fall into nihilism or cynicism or substance abuse. And, that substance abuse is not necessarily drugs or even alcohol. It can be video games, pornography, just any kind of substance that's able to create a bunch of dopamine for us so that we don't think about the problems around us. And going off of that, a lot of us, we don't wake up thinking that, man, today's the day I'm going to cheat on my wife. That's my goal. Or, I want to get addicted to oxycodone. That's not something that we think of. But there are small decisions that we make each and every day that eventually lead us down that path if we don't fix it earlier, right? And the farther we get into sin, the harder it is to get out of it. And one of the things that you do is that you help out the police union where we're at. Right now you're the president of one of our police unions. And so if you wouldn't mind, I don't want you to say people in particular, but I know that working with 300 odd officers, is that about where
our union covers 2 different local agencies with a total of about 500 officers, 200 from our agency.
So you've seen this, this decline or even this roller coaster. And I would suspect that with police officers, the roller coaster is even more exaggerated. I've heard that being a police officer is a lot like taking testosterone. People say that you can take testosterone. If you're a happy person, you become extremely happy. If you're an angry person, you become extremely angry. This job is the same way mentally. If you're already a joyful person, this job can make you more joyful. But if you're already a depressed person, you're going to become extremely depressed. Yep. So what are some of the ways that you have safeguarded yourself against falling into a lot of the sin that we see, unfortunately, a lot of our brothers and sisters fall into?
And I think having that relationship with Jesus has been the primary tool that I've used to veer away from that. But it's extremely hard that when we are consumed with negativity, that we see that really the most negative aspects of the world on a daily basis, there is that propensity to fall into that darkness. When I was training younger patrol officers, I was an FTO for quite a while, and it reminded me of the negativity, the department, the issues, the drama. It was like Venom, the Black Spider-Man. And it would creep into your life, and it would creep into my life. It wasn't necessarily, and there's been times where I know that I was drinking too much. There was times where negativity would consume 90% of my time. And so I don't believe any of us are impervious to that aspects of this job. But getting back to baseline, getting back to the good, healthy habits, I think is one of the tools. Building the team around you, I've always found very valuable about surrounding yourself with people that bring in light to your life, especially in this job. But being in church, having the most amazing wife, and I'm not just saying that. It really, when I can come home and she can sort through my nonsense and she can say, call truth to the table, allow me to call truth to the table, it's just refreshing. So her, good group of individuals, good healthy habits, daily habits in my life have really helped me. Touching on the union stuff, seeing what other people have gone through, and like you said, it's that bankruptcy, it's the X factor, it's the bad day when I usually get that phone call like extreme financial hardship or divorces, whatever it might be. I'm getting a lot of those kind of phone calls, peer support, critical incident debrief, or the union. It gives me insight to this is where that path happens, that slow creep in. I see that.
In some ways, your job is I have heard from, I had a really good FTO that once told me that police are the Band-Aid, right? We show up when the rest of society's social safety networks or really anyone else has kind of failed, and then the people that are calling the police because something drastic has happened because of multiple failures. I mean, people you don't arrive to someone attacking his wife with a hatchet all of a sudden. You don't get married one day and then do that the next day unless you're just an absolute crazy person.
Correct.
But when there has just been systematic problems, or I would argue systematic sin, that's where you eventually arrive to where the police come to your door. Well, it's with the police union stuff, or with your leadership in the police union, you are somewhat also acting kind of like the Band-Aid, right? Like people don't call you and say, "Hey, Ed, I've got a great marriage. I've got awesome kids. I've got, my finances are going great. I'm about to go buy a boat next week." People are calling you when, they owe their wife more than their paycheck in alimony, or they, got a DUI in their patrol car. There's really bad stuff that leads up to this, and this is something that Danny Jones talked about. Is this career suicide? There's a lot of stuff that the stuff builds up to, and eventually it boils over, and there is a turning point, right? But one of the things that you specialize in, ever since I've known you, one of the things that you talk about all the time is leadership. And one of the things that I believe is good, effective leadership is how, once we've arrived at this pit of whatever's going on, how do we direct this person to get out of that? Would you mind, telling us a little bit of your background on leadership and maybe answering that question a little bit?
Absolutely. And I've always had this kind of draw to take care of the underdog, the disenfranchised in the Marine Corps, the lowest rank, the guys that were always ragged on. I want to take care of them, especially when I feel like something's gone wrong for them. They've been treated unfairly. I want to be their voice. So any position I've ever held, whether it be in the Marine Corps or otherwise, I've sought those positions out. How can I be your voice? And our family, as a family, our mission is to serve those who serve. And so when I get called out from dinner time or whatever it might be to go help somebody out, or a phone call or whatever, our family has accepted that as one of our missions, is that we are serving those who serve. And so, further, so that's one of the pillars of my leadership, is to really focus on those that may be being treated unfairly, or at least have the perspective of being treated unfairly. I get many phone calls where I have to correct them and say, "Hey, A, B, or C, as you were actually not treated unfairly, and here's why." Give them that light of knowledge. Some of my background in leadership, I've always appreciated good quality leaders, and I think unfortunately, fortunately, however it may go, I'm so critical about like bad leaders, and it just dwells on me that when there's a bad leader or somebody that has a position that they could have great influence, they take advantage of it or they don't maximize it. And I'm sure that I've held positions as well, so it's not just cast in stones. I know that I've had some pretty big leadership failures. In the Marine Corps, I worked my way up. I was a E5. I was a sergeant. Before we left Afghanistan, I had about 100 Marines underneath me at any point in time. I had my main body of Marines that were about 40 strong, and we led a bunch of security convoys, did some other stuff over there. And the framework, it was day one at Parris Island, was you're going to at least have the knowledge on how to lead. And so regardless of your innate abilities or whatever, they're giving you the knowledge. And then they're also putting you in situations to apply that knowledge. And it was just something that it was one of those topics that just rang very loud to me. And, since then, class president ×2, and both my academies, coming up through the department. I've sat on a couple boards. Again, like you said, I'm the president of our local union. Jonathan Parker, the pastor of Cop Church, who's also a student of leadership, is how he explained it. And that's when he said that, I'm like, yeah, it's continual. It's never stopping. And so kind of, touching on your question about like, some of the, how to lead people when they're in the darkest of spots. It's terribly difficult, because I appreciate those calls. And so to offer that lending hand, and I think a lot of times it's just being there to answer the phone, I think is that big step one, that they know that they've got somebody that, hey, this is, and it's just like you made it a phenomenal comparison. The what I do with police is what police do to communities. And that most of the time when we get those calls, it's very easy. It's very simple. It's some comfort. It's some words of encouragement. It's some guidance. There's other things, but a lot of times it's very simple.
One of the things that I have noticed that we as police officers, sometimes we have an issue with, is that we have an issue with providing empathy to other people when they're going through maybe the same situation. Because, don't get me wrong, we're used to, in quotes, criminals, right? We're used to people that continuously break the law every day, and we have to go arrest them every other day. But sometimes, people that call the police are just normal people where something really bad's going down, and we will expect, and we will treat them poorly, not intending to, and I'm not saying that every police officer's done this, but I know that I personally, as a cop, have gone to a domestic and probably not given it the amount of time that I should have, because I was used to going to that call all the time. Yep. And it's something we have to realize is that we have this badge, we have this gun, and we're endowed with this power from the city, which is from the state, but through the people, that we have to serve people just like we want to be treated, right? And I think that that's one of the good hallmarks of a leader, is that a leader is not going to ask someone to do something that that he himself hasn't done. One of the best professors that I had at university was this professor where she had written book after book after book after book after book. And when she asked us to do a paper on X, Y, and Z, she was able to point to, maybe I've never written a paper directly on what you're about to write something on, but she was able to say, hey, I've been there, I've done that, I understand what you're going through. This may be real difficult for you, but everyone has been through this before that is doing this class. I've done it before myself. And she didn't expect anything that was She pushed you to do your best work, but didn't have unreasonable expectations as to what your work would be. And I think that is one of the hallmarks of a good leader. I don't know if you have any more insight on that one.
Yeah, that emotional intelligence, right? So there's not like, kind of stepping back, that leadership is it's ongoing. Being a student of leadership is ongoing, and so one of the things that I recognize is that 3 different people could bring me the same problem, and it's not a one size fits all. Each individual has different experiences and expectations of their leaders. And so to really get to know them, and I believe one of the foundations of leadership is being able to build relationships. So that's where, leadership is inspiring somebody to do something. And to be able to inspire somebody, you have to have a relationship with them. And it's not like a touchy-feely. It's just having them know that you care about what's going on with them. And so, again, going back to the 3 individuals having, even if it's the same financial problem, each one of them, through a relationship, you'll be able to kind of craft, whether it's guidance or just a talking or a listening ear, whatever it might be, you're able to kind of adjust your leadership style through different people. In law enforcement, we have like what is, deemed as a hierarchical leadership structure, and it's the top is up there and the bottom is down here, and it's not based much on relationship. It's based on rank and positions of authority, and I think we miss oftentimes within law enforcement, we miss what is expected of us. Going back to your story about showing up to a domestic violence, the expectation is that you care. You show some level of care for them and their family and whatever it is, and you put forth effort and good customer service and all that. And that's the expectation outwards. The expectation inwards, inside our four walls of our department, or law enforcement in general, is not based on relationship. It's hey, I'm this rank. Here's the expectations. Go do it. So I think that, finding myself in situations where I'm talking to officers or other individuals is getting to know them and, seeing how can I help? How can I be of service to them? And to give them the best of myself, to get to know them.
And I think that is a quality of a Christian, that he doesn't look towards how can he make, sweeping changes right here and now and address a bunch of problems. I think that the building block of any Christian walk, but especially that of a leader, is humility. And one of the ways that I personally try to embody that is whenever there is a problem that is presented to me. Like, let's say let's say all the police cars are dirty, and all of the 50 police cars that we have assigned to our precinct are dirty, right? And they say, okay, we have to make them all clean. Well, in 8 hours. Well, I can't go clean 50 cars in 8 hours. I can't do that. But I know that in where I am now, in my small little bubble of the little power that I have, I can maybe clean 3 or 4. And so whenever I come across a problem, I always try to ask, what are the small ways that I can make a change towards something that in the end is a greater good, right? And I think that sometimes that we miss that, and that we can sit and complain about something. There may be a systematic issue, right? But our job as police officers, at the end of the day, protect and serve, and a huge part of that is fixing things. Mm-hmm. And so our telos, the reminder, that is our purpose, is we're doers. We're out there. We're in the arena doing things, and one of the things that we can do is work in our small little bubble, in our small little way that we can, and to improve the world around us, right? Do you have any insight on that?
Yeah, as you're sitting there talking about having like this great job and trying to get people to come together, it leads me back to the inspiration. And in the book you had shared with me,
You are what you love.
You are what you love. He makes reference that if you need a boat built, don't teach somebody how to build a boat, but teach them to desire the sea. And it was just, and he says it multiple times in the book, and it just sank into me. I'm like, that's what we do. That's what we need to do, is to teach people what is that, to desire the greater purpose. Yeah, I think that as you begin to recognize because we are all doing it for the most part. We're doing something in our lives that are having those little incremental adjustments for good, whether it's on a call or, peer support sitting next to our officers, whatever it might be, recognizing it, changing it from like maybe sometimes like a passive thing to an intentional thing, and then growing it. It goes from, I'm a good listener to my officers or whatever. Okay, well then what else can I do with that skill set, that gift that God has blessed me with? What else can I do with that? And so being intentional, I think that was one of my pivotal points, is like, okay, God has blessed me with a couple gifts. And I need to be intentional with those, and I need to maximize them for the greater good.
Yeah. Yeah. That is, and in the long run, we are never going to be able to master all of the gifts that we could potentially have. Right. And, at the end of the day, I have noticed that, and this is not just police officers, but really anyone. As police, our job never ends, right? The end goal of a police department would be to have a jurisdiction where there is zero crime. Well, if there's zero crime, why does the police department exist, right? And so, at the end of the day, our people are going to commit crime. Our job is never going to end. And so, the problem that we have is that we can continue to fight to stop crime, but there will always be crime. And that I think is a small microcosm of one of every human's problems that we have, that we see on this earth, and that we continue to strive towards things. We always think that, okay, I need the next promotion, or I need this next car, or I need this bigger house, or whatever. And then I'm going to be happy, or I'm going to be such a better person, or I'm going to show all my friends that I now drive an Audi something, 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 and I'm the coolest guy on the block. Yeah. And, at the end of the day, we are never going to reach utopia here on this earth. That is only reserved for heaven.
That's right.
And so this is one of the great teachings of Ecclesiastes. We need to honor God with our work. And the way that we do that is being diligent, by embodying virtue, by continuing to glorify Him. But we also need to remember that we cannot make police work our telos. This is something that Danny Jones talked about a lot. We can't make police work the reason why we exist. Exactly. And at the end of the day, there has to be something else that is above that will continue to push us, so that we are able, I would argue, to better glorify God. If you read Ecclesiastes, a lot of people get the wrong message from Ecclesiastes. So a reminder about Ecclesiastes. Basically, in Ecclesiastes, it is a description of, you would almost think that someone who is a complete nihilist wrote it, because one of the quotes from Ecclesiastes is, I can't remember the exact verse, but vanity, vanity, everything is vanity. In the Hebrew, what that translates to is like vapor or wisp or nothing. Like you can't grab at something. And at the end of the day, the conclusion that, and this is, multiple chapters all condensed together, is that at the end of the day, while we are here on this earth, we are never going to be able to see the face of the Father. We are never going to be able to just ascend ourselves into heaven right now. So we should enjoy the life that God has given us and glorify Him with everything that we do. And that is with your family, that is with good drink and food, that is with your friends, that is with your hobbies, that is with your work. But at the end of the day, we cannot make police work our telos, our personal telos, because we are not ontologically built for that. The way in which we move in the earth is not built to be the super cop. It is built to glorify Christ. And if we don't glorify Christ, we are going to fall into sin. I cannot stress that enough. Yep. I think with that, we're going to take a little bit of a break. And we're back. Before we get into the next questions for Ed, I wanted to add a quote from Alexander Schmidtman's For the Life of the World. And this aligns with what I was just saying before the break. Quote, "When we see the world as an end in itself, everything becomes itself of value and consequently loses all value. Because only in God is found the meaning or value of everything. And the world is meaningful only when it is the sacrament of God's presence. Things treated merely as things in themselves destroy themselves because only in God have they any life. For the world of nature, cut off from the source of life, is a dying world." With that being said, what Ed, are a few ways that a Christian who knows that at the end of the day, his purpose is to glorify God, are some ways that a Christian can embody good leadership?
Good Christian leader, and there's so many facets of leadership. And again, going back to every time I think I know something, I recognize how many things I don't know. Living that Christian life, that life of service. As a leader, and more often than not, we get that backed up or upside down, that leaders are to be served and they're the governing authority instead of what Christ showed, and He came to be, to serve, not to be served. And so I think that's one of the things, and we just talked about that is my intentionality to serve those around me, below me, left, right, and above me. Being bold as a Christian and as a leader, taking those active, non-passive steps, taking those bold steps that oftentimes that we get afraid that we might be ridiculed or it may come back against us, even though we know it's the right thing. So those are a couple things that I think that a good Christian leader can take active steps in embodying Christ.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I've really admired about good leaders around, whether it be this department or outside, is that a good leader is able to speak truth even when it's not popular. If the world is against Christ, I am against the world, right? Or if the world is against truth, I am against the world. And then you need to be able to say that, something is wrong, that something is indeed wrong. And I really admire that about people who are able to publicly stand up and say that, even though, there may be repercussions for that. Another question along those lines. So I personally have never, I don't want to say never, but I really have not had a lot of professional or even extracurricular leadership positions. And so, one of the things that I know good leaders look for is other people to model themselves after. Do you have any saints or anyone in particular that you look up to, like, hey, this is someone that I really want to embody?
I think Paul, Paul just like resonates with me as you talk about standing up and saying what's, not popular, and he goes to Rome, or he, writes to Rome, and he's saying all the things that are not popular. He has leadership. The Bible is riddled with, like, in his writings, how his leadership abilities through not just other churches, but then his, the individuals that are close to him. Timothy, like, he takes him, and helps him develop as a Christian, as somebody that goes out and teaches the gospel.
At great personal sacrifice.
100%.
Let's
yes,
nail that.
Like,
that is,
death, like multiple times, death. And we're sitting here like, oh, I could be ridiculed, or I could get in trouble this way. He's facing death, and yet he still stands, like we just said, boldly stands and says, and proclaims Jesus. So that's, and not that I was an atheist or agnostic or anything like that, but I certainly had my times before I came to Christ, ridiculing some aspects of the church, and it was just and not to say that it was okay, but it was how I was raised.
Well, I mean, I would push back on being able to criticize the church. I believe that the church is made up of humans. Humans will always fail God. And so when church leadership fails, we really shouldn't be surprised. The best thing that we can do is reorient leadership towards Christ.
That's right.
Get rid of, if it's just an example of maybe a mismanagement, maybe that can be corrected. But if someone is living in obvious sin and they are leading a church, they need to leave that church.
Absolutely.
And if that sin is illegal, be prosecuted. I can't, this is a pedestal for me, but I cannot stress enough how important it is for us to prosecute, especially those who are in authority for personal crimes. The obvious example here is pastors or priests that prey upon kids. Not only do they need to be defrocked, they need to be prosecuted, because what they are doing is wrong in the eyes of God and the eyes of the world.
Absolutely.
That is something that I can't stress enough, is that we have to apply the same morals that we enforce on others on ourselves as well.
That's right.
Legally there's a couple examples of exceptions, but those are in the course of our duties. And
correct.
Like, those are, driving, right? We have an exception for driving, or we have an exception, we're legally the only people allowed to, quote unquote, kidnap people. We're not kidnapping per se, but
taking their right of freedom away.
Yeah.
And that's a huge responsibility.
Yeah. And so with that power that we have to do that, as you have said, does come great responsibility. Correct. Spider-Man's right. What are some of the qualities that you believe define a good leader and a bad one?
I think some of the qualities that define a good leader are there's that humility, recognizing the things that you don't know, recognizing the fact that we shouldn't believe. I guess the quote is, we shouldn't believe everything that we think, because as you and I sit here, some of the things that we think are not true and actual. And the recognition, or to recognize that, is that humility. The putting yourself second or third or last, being able to put people above you, to give that self-sacrifice of, I'm giving of my time, my money, my energy, being able to sacrifice that, are just some of those core qualities of a good leader. Teachability, being able to learn, a new skill set or something like that, to be able to become more well-rounded. some of the qualities of a bad leader, and I could go on for a very long time about that, but not being genuine to who you are. I see some individuals that are just fake, that they put on this front of who they think they ought to be, and they don't recognize their flaws and their weaknesses, and they have all these blind spots. And the really hard thing is when they are smart and intelligent and they recognize them, but they turn away from that, where they know that they have these weaknesses and they refuse to make any kind of forward progress to strengthen themselves. Greed, selfishness, not caring for others, not having the ability, or not taking the time to try to get to know those in and around their circle of influence. So those are a couple of the good and bad aspects of leadership, that I think that, and there's a million books and there's articles and there's research and everything. At the core of leadership is, I truly believe, relationship, and getting to know people, showing them that you care.
Yeah, that's something that I think that sometimes I do a poor job of expressing this to my wife and the rest of my family, is that when you are a police officer's wife, you do sacrifice for part of it is your husband's sanity, part of it is the community in of itself. And I think that that's something that we need to do, is recognize that my wife has put up with me working the weirdest shift in the world, and on top of that, she deals with all the ins and outs of working for what would be a paramilitary organization. So we get called in all the time, especially someone who does investigations. You are on call, and some days you may be at home with your family about to sit down and eat dinner. Hey, we've got a search warrant, let's go. And so I think that a good leader also recognizes that the people around him that enable him to quote unquote lead, right? And that is something that if you are married as a police officer, please express to your spouse that you are one of the reasons why I can do this, and your support even during this, when I don't want to go out either and deal with whatever's going on, but your support during that means so much, because I know that it affects you as well. That's something that another soapbox I want to stand on, is that is so important to express that to your significant others, to your spouse.
Yeah, and within, and I guess that appreciation, you're absolutely right. Like my wife is just, I couldn't do it like nearly any of the things that I do without her unwavering support. I mean, it's a dinner time, like, hey, I gotta go. It's a 2 a.m. like, hey, I'm leaving. Don't know when you'll be back. Like all this uncertainty that she lives with. And we talk about trauma for law enforcement officers, but trauma is cumulative, even in the micro doses. So, call out at 2 a.m. or a close call, or, a text and a bunch of uncertainty about when I'll be home. All of those things add up, and yet they still do it. The supportive spouses of law enforcement officers, and we as officers, like you said, we don't do a good enough job saying thank you, I appreciate it. I couldn't do this without you. We want our quiet time. We want to go into our little confined space and just appreciate the quiet and the sanity for a second. But they need us. They need that energy from us. So again, it's sacrificing. They sacrifice for us, so we ought to give back to them.
So, and one of the things that you touched on is the micro trauma, right? The daily ins and outs of this job, and the book that we were just kind of talking about, You Are What You Love. He talks about a bunch of what are the daily habits that you can do. One of the things that really struck me a couple days ago when I learned it is that the traditional definition, so in the Bible, the definition of worship is analogous, or it to the word sacrifice. So a worship is sacrifice, right?
Yep.
And so, the Jews would sacrifice a bull to God, to Yahweh. And, Christ is the ultimate sacrifice. That is central to Christianity. And one of the things that, every day we can see that sometimes we do make sacrifices. And if we are sacrificing one thing for another, then we are worshiping that one thing over the other, right? With police work, we don't get paid the most amount of money. You don't do this job. I've said this before. You don't do this job because you want to get rich. Right. And so one of the things that police officers will commonly do, if your department allows it, is work a bunch of extra jobs, or that's off duty. You've already worked your 40 hours that week. You have you go in on your off time and work. In some ways, that can be nice to provide for your family. If you want to get something cool, buy a gun, buy something, buy a shirt, whatever. But at the end of the day, if you're sacrificing time with your family for that, you are inherently worshiping police work you are worshiping police work and not glorifying your family.
That's right.
And I cannot stress once again the importance of being there with your family, because at the end of the day, you got to glorify Christ. If and the Orthodox view, the Eastern Orthodox view on the family, is that the family is a little church. It is, you've got the dad is the leader, mom is also there right there with them. You've got the kids, and so you have to lead your family, hopefully to glorify Christ, and in all that you do.
Yeah.
And so when you make sacrifices, and I mean that in all intents and purposes, then you're inherently not glorifying God, because when you make sacrifices, let me rephrase that. Many times, police officers make sacrifices for glorious and noble things. At the end of the day, if a police officer sacrifices his life for the community, that is one of the most humble and utmost just worthy of praise things that a police officer can do, if not the most for a police officer. But on the other hand, you can't worship money or make decisions that require you to work a bunch of extra jobs, so that, because at the end of the day, that's not glorifying to your family, and it's not glorifying to God. That's right. And so that another soapbox to stand on here, but that is something that I think that we sometimes don't get.
Yeah. We are called. It's inherent in this job that we're going to have to sacrifice. We're going to have to sacrifice time with our family, and that is where is our heart at? Are we sacrificing that just simply to get more money, to go buy things, to get more money, to vacations and everything? So I think that there's some intentionality behind, like, what is it that is drawing you away from your family? What is your heart saying? Is it to go serve? Is it to go, to go keep the active shooter call comes out and like, hey, I've got to go. I'm serving, versus, hey, I got this extra job. It's $55 an hour. I've got to be there for 6 hours on Saturday, and we can't go to Lake Winnie, right? So two different things right there. So that sacrifices worship, giving. And one of the things, and it was said, in the academy and whenever else, is that when you're home, you're home. When you're at work, you're at work. And so many times I see how these lines just, they get grayed and they get blurred, and officers are at home doing all this work, and then they're at work and they're doing all, they 8 hours. I've seen guys that I work with, 8 hours, they're on the phone texting or calling or communicating with their spouse. And I'm like, whoa, hey, you're here. Let's be here. And obviously there's times, but when it's a pattern, it's like we've got to have those divides, so that when you are at home, that you are lifting your family up, that you are actively leading your family. You're intentional. You're well rested. You're healthy, and you're there. and then be here.
So what are some of the quotidian practices, the day-to-day practices that we can do so that we are better able to lead our families and, at the end, hopefully to glorify Christ?
Yeah, absolutely. And it kind of goes back to that divide that we are, when we're at home and there's nothing else going on, we're not just reading emails to read emails, that we do that in a designated time. So organization, I think, is like being intentional with our time, that when I get to work, I get all of my initial work stuff done. I get my emails done. But when I get up in the morning, I get up very early in the morning, and I'm very blessed to have a first shift job. And I'm very blessed to have a stay-at-home wife that, gets the kids up and they do all of those things. So some of my daily habits aren't, kind of like widespread, but I do believe that there are things that can be gleaned from it. Organization. We often walk into people's lives as officers, and it's just this happenstance that everything's just kind of in a mess, and it's a disarray. And we usually see them like the outcome. The product of that is we look in their house and it's a mess. And so if we can organize our lives and our time, that we can be intentional with it, I think that gives us the power to lead our families. That I have this time that I try to be very intentional for 30 minutes before the kids go to school. That's our time. That's my time to how are the kids doing, helping my wife, doing those things.
Yeah, personally, one of the things that I've recently started doing is that whenever I am home for the evening, I will help my kid with her bedtime routine. That's something that my wife said initially, like after bed or after dinner, I really didn't want to do anything, because normally if I'm the one who's at the house, 9 out of 10 times I'm the one cooking. That's something that I've picked up. Yeah. And one of the things that after cooking, sometimes you just want to sit there and not read a book or not do anything. And, I think it's important for us to, spend time with my kid in, what would be considered like an intimate environment, yes. Right? Where, she's getting ready to, get a bath, go to sleep, do day-to-day stuff. But, for a 2-year-old, that means a lot, because look at here, Dad's spending time with me when he's home, and he's helping me out with the things that I can't do. Once again, we are physically, we are way greater than your very small child is, and so that means a lot when you have to do a lot for them, right? It's you're sacrificing for your kid, and so and
on that, like I've definitely taken it. It's a very vulnerable state that children are in, getting ready for bed, because they're essentially away from you, especially a young child like 2 years old that like is used to adult contact, and so you're putting them in a dark room, and you're the last thing that they see and speak with and think of before bed. And so it's a very vulnerable and impressionable time for children. And I do the same thing with my 2 boys, and I've done that. I've got a 9-year-old and a 6-year-old, and my baby girl is going to turn 4. So yes, yeah.
We pray the Our Father, and then we do, we make sure to cross ourselves, and then we, till our night. I think that a great interview. It has been really good to have you here to talk about, a lot of different things, especially around leadership. If you have any questions, feel free to email remainingsanepodcast@gmail.com. Once again, the remainingsanepodcast@gmail.com. You can also find us on Twitter at remainingsanepc. This is the Remaining Sane, Finding Peace in Our Chaos podcast.
Have a blessed rest of your day.